Hello, language enthusiasts. It's good to come your way again with another episode of your favorite language program, the African Language Service Providers Podcast, aka the Africa LSP Podcast. My name is Grace Hamwajiman, and I am excited to make your acquaintance again. If today is your first time here, then you're fortunate because this is a safe space for you to learn about Africa and its languages. And for my returning audiences, I appreciate your comeback. Talking about comeback, let's take this quick break from Bolingo Consult, and I will come back shortly. Stay with me.
Welcome to Africa's LSP Podcast, where we explore the world of translation, interpretation, and localization, as well as connect with the language industry's top players. From language service providers to the businesses and individuals who rely on their services, we'll be delving into the challenges, opportunities, and trends shaping the industry. Join us as we discover the power of language and the impact it has on connecting Africa and the world. Brought to you by Bolingo Consult, Africa's LSP Podcast is the go-to podcast for all things language in Africa.
Today's episode is titled Language Planning Mechanisms Towards Kiswahili as a Trade Language of the East African Community in Rwanda. The keywords to look out for are planning, trade mechanisms, and of course, Kiswahili. And when you hear either myself or my guests say EAC, then that means East African Community, because we're going to be using that a lot. I'm privileged to be joined by Dr. Masezerano Wycliffe. Doc, forgive me if I don't get your name, if I butcher your name. Dr. Masezerano Wycliffe. He's a researcher in governance and regional integration and linguistics. Hello, Doc. You're welcome to Africa's LSP Podcast, and we are honored to have you.
Hello, Grace. Thank you very much for inviting and having me to the Africa's LSP Podcast. Since Emmanuel's email to me, I tried to find out what Africa's LSP Podcast is, and I realized that it is a very important initiative targeting the promotion of African languages through translation, interpretation, and localization. You will pardon me if I do forget anything about Africa's LSP Podcast. So I can tell you that I am very delighted to be your guest today and share with you some insightful thoughts about African languages, more particularly Kiswahili language, as a trade and communication language of the East African community.
Oh, thank you for those kind words about the LSP podcast. We really appreciate it. So, Doc, let's get right into it. You can start by telling us a bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, where you're based, what you do, and anything interesting you think my audience and myself would like to know about you, maybe your family or professional life.
Thank you, Grace, for the interesting and broad question. Briefly, as you have mentioned, I am Masezerano Wycliffe. I hold a PhD in Governance and Regional Integration, which I got from the Institute of Governance, Humanities, and Social Sciences of the Pan-African University, which is hosted by the University of Yaoundé too, that is in Cameroon. Naturally, I come from Rwanda. I am a Rwandan. That is where I am based currently, and I do work as an assistant lecturer at the University of Rwanda in its College of Arts and Social Sciences in the Department of Political Science. Yeah, apart from that, I have a young family with one wife whom we married in April this year. My first degree is in languages with education, which gives me more interest in languages. After my first degree, I taught in secondary schools for 3 years, that is from 2013 up to 2014, and the whole year of 2017. I started my master's towards the end of 2014 in governance and regional integration. Then I started the PhD studies since 2017 up to 2020. Professionally, I like working in education sector with the objective of transferring the knowledge I have to others. That is what I can say about myself.
Wow, Doc, I must say you have a rich background, both in experience and education. And it's good that we get to tap into your rich wealth of knowledge. At this moment, we all want to know what was the motivation behind this research.
Well, I can say that there might be several motivations for anyone to be curious about studying the importance of language for integration in Africa. For me, there is a combination of two things that prompted me in carrying out this study. One is that as a person who had studied languages in my first degree and doing both master's and doctoral studies in governance and regional integration, I wanted to look at the importance of languages, more particularly African languages, in the process of regional integration. This was also due to the fact that I could see other students being interested in other aspects of integration like trade, law, governance, etc. So as a person with interest in languages, I felt like the linguistic aspect is being neglected. So that was the first reason that motivated me to work on languages and regional integration for the sake of looking at how linguistic aspect can be also linked with regional integration. The second thing that prompted me to carry out this study was related to the sociolinguistic aspect of Kiswahili language as an African language which has extended its linguistic line, we call it iso-linguistic, from the two EAC countries to other countries of the community, including Rwanda, which is the case in my study. So when I was doing extensive literature review, I realized that Kiswahili was yet to have a satisfactory number of speakers in Rwanda, which is a very important element when it comes to language development. So I wanted to see how Rwanda maintains such precious language, which is already the official language of the EAC, as it was decided by the EAC Legislative Assembly. Moreover, there was that spirit of Pan-Africanism that also pushed me. I could think that it is also possible for Africans to use their own languages while trading and moving in their regional communities and the entire continent.
Your research highlights the importance of language for regional integration in Africa. So then, talk to us about the specific challenges and opportunities that Kiswahili presents in this context.
Thank you, Grace, for this significant question. I would like to address this question starting from opportunities, then challenges. Let me tell you, Grace, that Kiswahili as an African language presents several opportunities. This can be discussed at the global, continental, regional, and the local levels. At the global level, Kiswahili is among African languages that are widely taught in American and European universities. For instance, Moshi in 2004 stated that European institutions of higher education have intensive study of Kiswahili. And in America, there are universities like St. Lawrence University, University of Michigan, and at its Department of Afro-American and African. Then there is also the Language Resource Center at the Columbia University. Apart from this, you can find people speaking Kiswahili in other continents other than Africa. Grace, I can tell you that Kiswahili is an easy language to learn and acquire. And due to that aspect, Kiswahili is widely used in media, whether at the international level or local level. For instance, there are Swahili programs on BBC, VOA, and RFI. And the local media houses use Kiswahili. This includes media houses in the East African region. Again, Kiswahili has been recognized as a language for promoting peace, unity, cultural diversity, awareness, and dialogue. Additionally, there is a fixed World Kiswahili Language Day by the United Nations Education, Science, and Culture Organization. This is UNESCO. This day is celebrated every 7th July of every year. On this day, There are several language practices that are performed in Kiswahili. This is an incredible opportunity for Kiswahili to grow as a language for trade and communication, not only in the EAC, but also in Africa and at the global level. If we look at the continental level, Kiswahili has been promoted to be the official language of the African Union, and it is spoken in many African countries, starting from the Eastern African countries. Recognizing Kiswahili as official language is a very big opportunity for it to grow, since this recognition is defined as a legal status, which gives non-EAC countries to start exploiting opportunities that lie in Kiswahili language. For instance, on 7th July 2023, VOA reported that the Malawi's president ordered schools to start teaching Kiswahili. I also once heard Julius Malema, a prominent politician from South Africa, campaigning for Kiswahili to be taught in South African schools. Kiswahili, as a language widely spoken in Eastern Africa, it has been decided by the EAC as a regional integration bloc that Kiswahili is not only the language of communication, but it is also the official language of the community. This is a very big opportunity for Kiswahili to contribute to the integration of the bloc and of Africa entirely. For this reason, there was an EAC commission created for Kiswahili promotion. This commission has initiated several programs, including the Kiswahili Mobility Program in the community, and there have been also regional conferences organized on Kiswahili. There is also a Kiswahili scholarship for African students to do masters, and these students must not come from Tanzania, which is considered as a country of origin of Kiswahili. However, this scholarship is given to few numbers of students, and I would tell you that I was also selected for this program, though I did not attend it. In the EAC, there are member countries that have decided Kiswahili to be the official language. For instance, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi have recognized Kiswahili as official language. In both Tanzania and Kenya, Kiswahili is a national language. Among 8 countries in the EAC, there are still 3 countries reluctant in making it official language. This poses a challenge to Kiswahili. So, Grace, talking about challenges of Kiswahili as a language of trade and communication in the EAC, I'd like to tell you that I had a chance to write a paper in 2020 highlighting these challenges. And I categorized these challenges in the following way. I realized that there are challenges related to traditional challenges. There are also challenges related to colonial legacy. There are also challenges related to constitutional recognition. There are challenges related to existing local languages and new emerging languages. There is also challenge related to educational and challenges related to lexical and also financial challenge. If I can explain, the first challenge, which is related to traditional challenge, has 2 things. There is historical origin of Kiswahili, and the second thing is the modernity. Some scholars argue that Kiswahili was brought by Arab traders, while others argue that Arabic language was mixed with already existing languages at the Swahili coast, which provided the birth of Kiswahili language. So appropriating Kiswahili with these historical origins gives impression to Africans that Kiswahili is not an African language, and this may result in people having negative attitude towards Kiswahili. The second challenge I discussed in my paper was about Kiswahili language facing colonial legacy challenge. Here, I would tell you that after the independence, most EAC countries have adopted English and French as their working languages, which not only weakens Kiswahili, but also weakens their national languages. These languages dominate Kiswahili promotion because they receive funds from colonial masters for their various programs. Another challenge I talked about in that paper is related to constitutional recognition of Kiswahili as an official language. As I previously mentioned, as per today, there are still 3 member countries of the EAC that have not constitutionally defined Kiswahili as a working language. It must be reminded that this is a very important element in the language planning mechanism. Promoting a language to this status opens doors to language scientists and the language users to apply the language officially, and this motivates other people to learn and acquire the language. Another challenge I mentioned was related to already existing local language and new emerging languages in the community. For instance, Habwe in 2009 said that Kiswahili faces a major challenge related to Sheng as a language in Kenya. This is an emerging language in Kenya. And when it comes to existing local language, I will give you an example. In Uganda, Ugandans still stick on Ruganda language and reject Kiswahili or dislike Kiswahili by appropriating it to the army. So this poses a great challenge to Kiswahili to grow as a trade and communication language for the EAC integration. For the education-related challenge, I would tell you that one author called Mazrui and Mazrui noted that African countries, including EAC members, embrace colonial languages as a medium of instruction in education. Moreover, Kitura in 1999 noted that there is a deficiency of African languages like Kiswahili in scientific and technical registers. So this means that researchers are not interested in writing in Kiswahili, and also Kiswahili is missing in the technological vocabularies. The latter point explains the challenge of lacking modernity and the vocabularies for the technological discoveries. The last challenge, but not the least, I discussed in my paper was related to lack of funds. Kiswahili does not have programs that are financed like other programs of languages from developed countries like English, French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Chinese language, and the other major languages program on the continent. Habwe, for instance, said that English, German, French, and other major languages from colonial and other developed countries present in the EAC receive funds from home countries. But when you look at Kiswahili, there are no programs that are funded by either EAC or Tanzania and Kenya. And when those programs are started, there are no money that are provided for those programs to make Kiswahili to grow and develop. For instance, there is a Kiswahili Master's Program of University of Dar es Salaam, I earlier mentioned. This program is supported by the EAC, but it does not receive enough funds to motivate people to apply for it. Grace, I must tell you that I was given this scholarship and refused it because it was not interesting in terms of money. Again, Zahene Kwarshi in 2013 also mentioned that there was a Ghanaian program that failed because Ghanaian students who were supposed to go and do that program were in charge of the full cost of their studies. So I would like to tell you that no matter whatever opportunities Kiswahili has to become a language of regional integration without financial support, it will not be easy for it to grow. Moreover, we must remember that a language to grow depends on the level of economic development of countries that are considered as origin of that language. So the level of industrialization of Tanzania and Kenya, which are the countries considered as origin of Kiswahili, and even the EAC, which means the volume of export of these countries and the community will play an important role in promoting Kiswahili as a trade and integration language in the EAC and on the continent.
Most definitely, I couldn't have agreed more with you on all the points you have raised, especially with the opportunities that this language provides. And for those who are ardent listeners of this podcast, they will attest to this fact. But it's rather unfortunate that the lack of adequate funding to support the language promotion hinders a lot of prospects. And as a Ghanaian, I feel bad that my fellow Ghanaian students could not take up that opportunity you mentioned because of the financial constraints. So, Doc, that then brings me to my next question. Apart from the many opportunities that this language provides, your study found that current language planning mechanisms in Rwanda are not enough to promote Kiswahili effectively. Can you share some specific examples of these mechanisms and how they might be improved, especially as the language is gradually becoming a globally accepted language?
Actually, the language promotion is not possible when there are no mechanism planned for it, as I have mentioned in the previous question. I want to tell you that when Spolsky was developing his theory of language policy in 2004, he stated that language planning involves three important things, and those things are status, corpus, and acquisition planning. My study focused on two things among the three involved in the language planning. These are status and acquisition planning. In these aspects, the study looked at various mechanisms that can influence the promotion of a selected language like Swahili. The mechanism I talked about in my study are: first, government being involved in creating and encouraging the creation of centers that teach Kiswahili. And this mechanism can be improved when the government starts public centers that teach Kiswahili to people. And these centers can be specifically started at the borders and urban areas where people interested in moving in the EAC are mostly found. The second mechanism was that one related to government supporting private people who want to create those centers. This can be improved by making the government mobilizing and supporting private sector to start such centers to teach Kiswahili for both traders and other people who are interested in Kiswahili. The third specific mechanism I talked about in my paper is that mechanism related to government and its stakeholders encouraging manufacturers to label their products in Kiswahili or in other EAC official languages. There are so many ways in which this mechanism can be improved. For instance, EAC and its member countries may put incentives on each product manufactured within EAC and labeled in all EAC official languages. They can also, for instance, put some tax exemption, and this can be also applied to imported products in the community. If this is done, it can not only promote the use of Kiswahili and other official languages, but it can also increase the volume of trade in the EAC. Another specific mechanism that I talked about in my paper was that of government accompanying writers and researchers to write in Kiswahili. To improve on this mechanism, governments and their stakeholders can prepare sponsored symposia, conferences, and essay writing competitions in Kiswahili and other related activities. The fifth mechanism I talked about was that of government and its stakeholders trying to avail interpreters at the level of communities. There is nothing to improve on this mechanism other than training competent and enough interpreters and transfer them to communities that need them. These communities are, of course, the communities I discussed in my paper, the bordering and urban communities. The next mechanism is the mechanism related to encouraging children at school to learn and acquire Kiswahili. This can be done or can be improved in producing stories, songs, short books written in Kiswahili and teach Kiswahili to children in the whole education system. Again, there can be the empowerment of Kiswahili teachers and provide with them the necessary knowledge of Kiswahili as it was recommended by Muraga in 2017 in his paper that was talking about the history of Kiswahili in Rwanda. Grace, can you allow me to share a story with you? In Rwanda, by the time French was replaced by English as a medium of instruction, there was a teacher looking at teaching job in Rwanda. This teacher was capable of teaching science subjects like chemistry, physics, and mathematics. When the teacher arrived at the school, they told him that the only subject that was left without a teacher was Kinyarwanda language. The teacher said, I quote, "As long as you give me books and other documents, I can teach Kinyarwanda language." End of quote. The school administration was astonished on how a teacher who was looking for a teaching job of science subject was going to teach Kinyarwanda. So this is a story about teachers who teach languages without knowledge and skills about it. What does this imply? It implies that Kiswahili also still faces challenges like this one in the story, where teachers do not have capacity to teach it, and some of these teachers teach Kiswahili as a survival, not as a passion and a profession, with required skills of teaching languages, more particularly foreign languages. The last mechanism, but not the least, is that one related to encouraging local readers to learn Kiswahili so that they can motivate other people to learn and acquire Kiswahili language.
Wow, Doc, I must say these are very practical solutions that can change a lot for us when it comes to the Kiswahili language. And we're grateful you're sharing all of that with us on the Africa LSP podcast. Again, your methodology included collecting data from border and urban communities. Why was it so important to focus on these areas in particular?
Well, I'd like to tell you that researchers in linguistics have testified the importance of bordering and urban communities in the rapid promotion and expansion of a language. It becomes very real when the language is from the neighboring country or countries. For instance, Neo Mugabo, who is a professor in language education, in 2019 said that Rwandan bordering communities present a pathway for the development of Kiswahili in Rwanda, since those communities are on borders of countries that use Kiswahili. So people from these communities can be a good start and motivation for the rest of Rwandans to learn Kiswahili. Also, apart from airports as gates into a country, terrestrial and water borders are also gates into or out of a country. So people coming in Rwanda from Kiswahili-speaking countries through the water and terrestrial borders will definitely come into contact with people living around borders. Through these contacts, people will easily learn and acquire Kiswahili. The motivation to look at urban communities was related to the fact that traders and drivers of goods and products from Kiswahili-speaking countries, particularly Tanzania via the Dar es Salaam port and Kenya via the Mombasa port, have a direct contact with urban settlers. Additionally, on this point, it is very important to note that people living in rural areas easily imitate and learn whatever good thing they see from people living in urban communities. By considering these aforementioned points, it is very evident that bordering and urban communities play an important role in promoting Kiswahili language as a trade and communication language of the EAC and of the continent.
Right. So the research suggests that existing mechanisms have some effectiveness. Can you elaborate on what aspects of the current planning seem to be working and why?
Thank you, Grace, for the question. In the context of Rwanda, which was the case study in my research, I would say that the current planning aspects that seem to be working are the status and acquisition aspects of language planning. I say this because Kiswahili language has got the constitutional status to be the language to be taught in education system in Rwanda, and it has also been recognized as an official language provided by the organic law that was passed by the Rwandan Parliament in February 2017. Then in the context of the whole EAC community, there are 4 countries out of 8 countries that consider Kiswahili as either both national and official language, or as official language only. Among the remaining 4 countries, one of them, which is Burundi, considers Kiswahili in its education system. We cannot forget that there is a large community that speaks Kiswahili in the eastern part of DRC. In the acquisition planning aspect, this aspect seems to be working both in Rwanda and EAC in general, since there is a production of books of teaching Kiswahili in formal education. The production of these books is supported by, of course, by governments. In addition, there are also private people who adventure in producing smaller pamphlets that teach Kiswahili language. For instance, there are people who are selling these smaller books in Kigali bus station. However, when you observe these people selling these smaller books, you can imagine that they do not receive any support from language planners and governments. So looking at other mechanisms or other language planning aspects, you may say that they are forgotten, and this is due to challenges that I have already mentioned. So we can say that until those challenges are addressed, Kiswahili will continue struggling in becoming the language of integration of the EAC and Africa.
Well, this is good to know. You are still locked on to the Africa LSP podcast with me, Grace Hamwajuman, and my guest is Dr. Wycliffe Masezerano, a researcher in governance and regional integration and linguistics. And today we're talking about language planning mechanisms towards Kiswahili as a trade language of the EAC in Rwanda. So now, going forward and beyond the recommendations in your study, do you think there are any other broader initiatives that could be undertaken to promote Kiswahili as a language of trade in the EAC?
Of course, there are other initiatives that can be applied to promote Kiswahili as a language of trade and integration in the EAC. Those initiatives may include 1. The increasing of funds for mobility programs like the one I have already mentioned, which was started by the EAC Kiswahili Commission. And this can go with increasing the number of these mobility programs to make them many in the community. The second initiative can go with the support of artworks produced in Kiswahili language. This can include songs, poems, short stories, and movies written in Kiswahili. Another initiative is related to encouraging the labeling products manufactured within the EAC in all official languages of the EAC. And this can be also followed by providing some incentives to manufacturers who label their products in all EAC official languages. This will explicitly take Kiswahili language out of the community due to the exportation of products labeled in Kiswahili language. So it will be a good initiative to promote Kiswahili as a trade and communication language in the EAC and on the continent of Africa. The next initiative can be related to creating and funding Kiswahili scholarships around the EAC. And this initiative can promote Kiswahili as both trade and integration language of the community. Another initiative is related to sharing lecturers and teachers of Kiswahili among the EAC universities and secondary schools, and this should be supported by both EAC Inter-Universities Council and member countries. The last initiative, but not the least, I think the encouraging of media and social media users to try to use Kiswahili when they want their message to reach many people, can be also a good thing to promote Kiswahili as a trade and communication language, both in the EAC and on the continent.
I'm talking about media contribution. That is why for us here at the LSP Podcast, we always avail our platform to all languages, including Kiswahili, as our way of promoting African languages. So you too listening to me, wherever you are, make sure that in your either small or big way, you are contributing to the spread and progress of the African language and heritage. And your research focuses on Rwanda, but do you think their findings have implications for other African countries seeking to promote regional integration through language?
Thank you, Grace, for this interesting question. Well, it is possible that the findings of my study have implications on language policy that promotes Kiswahili as a trade language in the EAC. To answer your question on whether the findings can be generalized to other countries, I would say that generalization is something which is dealt with attention in research unless you do maybe what we call replicability. However, intuitively, the science of language is universal when contexts are considered. Therefore, it is possible that other African countries or other regional communities can borrow from the study findings and start promoting their African regional languages. For instance, why wouldn't it be possible for ECOWAS region to pick one or two African regional languages to be the languages of trade of the community? For instance, they can pick Hausa, or they can pick Fulani, or Pidgin language. This can be selected and be promoted by applying mechanisms that were identified as effective language planning mechanisms in my study. Picking a local language for trade transactions will benefit both local people and foreign investors. For example, local people would not struggle in finding an English or French vocabulary for a local commodity. They will just use the vocabulary from the local language they daily use. Another example is that there are several kinds of herbs and traditional materials in Africa that are hard to find English or French vocabulary to mean them. For foreign investors targeting local markets, labeling products in local languages will increase the buying decision of local clients, and again, bargaining in local languages will increase the local client's choice. So this would be very, very important things when it comes to promoting regional integration through languages.
Doc, so if we have to move beyond Kiswahili, how can African countries in general leverage the continent's linguistic diversity for economic and social development? Is there a possibility in that? Can we come together as a continent and leverage on our continent's linguistic diversity?
There are several things that can be done for African countries to leverage African linguistic diversity. One is to consider the planning mechanism, which will involve looking at the status, structure of those languages, development of them, and the acquisition of these African languages. Some scholars talk about horizontal and vertical role of African languages in regional integration due to the linguistic diversity. Where does this debate come from? Scholars have their communities of origin with their languages. So you realize everyone is arguing in support of his or her language of origin, and this is obvious, and you cannot blame him or her. This can be resolved in trying to incorporate vocabularies from other languages into regional languages. Again, our linguists can keep working on corpus aspect of language planning, and this is to say that the linguists can start incorporating African languages vocabularies inter-regional languages. For instance, if you travel to EAC and you realize that there are some vocabularies from Akan language in Kiswahili, it will motivate you in learning and acquire Kiswahili easily. The same case to an EAC citizen traveling to Ghana and realizes that some Kiswahili vocabularies are in Akan language. It will motivate him or her to learn and acquire the Akan language. By doing this, people will stop undermining some African languages, and there will be the enriching of the vocabularies of African languages, particularly on the aspect of synonyms. The second thing to do is to value the informal use of these languages. For instance, you cannot control how languages are used by artists. When they do it with intention, the mixing of languages in arts can really help people to learn and acquire other languages.
So, Doc, this research focuses on Kiswahili as a trade language. Do you see potential for Kiswahili to also serve as a language of scholarship and education across the EAC?
Definitely. There are potentials for Kiswahili to become the language of scholarship and education. As I have mentioned, one of the current working planning mechanisms for Kiswahili are status and acquisition planning. This means that students, particularly those in lower level of secondary schools and those studying languages, are learning Kiswahili. So if these students continue their higher learning in Kiswahili, they will be able to do and write their research in Kiswahili. And once this is done, they will be also to be able to write their academic works, their books, their articles in Kiswahili. But this is going to be possible when governments, institutions, and EAC invest in Kiswahili as a medium of instruction in higher learning studies. For education, it is quite challenging for EAC countries to independently choose Kiswahili as a medium of instruction since they are still financially and economically dependent.
And looking ahead, we're almost at the end of our conversation. I've enjoyed it so much, but let me just push this in. Looking ahead, what are some of the exciting possibilities that Kiswahili adoption as a trade language could bring to the EAC?
Thank you, Grace, for asking this question. The adoption of Kiswahili as a trade language of the EAC could make, for instance, citizens of the EAC able to move and interact freely without communication barriers. The second thing that can be brought by adopting Kiswahili as a trade language of the EAC is to make people to have the power of bargaining, and this will also increase for other EAC countries where Kiswahili is not yet spoken at large. Another thing is that people within the community will increase the choice of products because of understanding products very well through languages used on products packages, that is through labeling. Lastly, but not least, once manufacturers within EAC label their products in EAC official languages, including Kiswahili, those languages will get a chance, you don't forget Kiswahili, will get a chance to be exposed to the rest of Africa and the world.
So like I mentioned in my introduction, EAC means East African communities. And I earlier mentioned that we're going to use that a lot. So if you hear it, EAC means the East African communities. All right. So obviously and simply put, life will be way much easier in trade, commerce, education, integration, and I mean every other aspect of life if we're able as a people to promote and adopt Kiswahili as a trade language for the EAC and beyond. Doc, so we're at the end of our episode. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us? You can go ahead and do that.
Thank you, Grace. One final thing I can share is to tell Africans to be proud of their languages and advocate for them at the global level. And I would be happy and you bear with me that you will be also happy to see an African language or to see Kiswahili being used at both AU and the UN sessions. It will be very, very interesting for you and for other Africans.
Obviously and definitely, I couldn't have agreed any less with you, Doc. Thank you again so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge with me and my audience, and we have learned and grabbed a lot. It's been great talking to you, Dr. Masezerano Wycliffe, and thanks for generously sharing insights with us. Your presence on the Africa's Language Service Providers podcast has been truly invaluable, and we'll make sure to provide our listeners with links to your LinkedIn profiles and to sites where they can find more about you. Thank you once again for your time and contribution.
Thank you, Grace, for having me as your guest today, talking about the lore of Kiswahili as a trade and communication language in the EAC. It has been a pleasure to me to be on Africa's LSP Podcast, sharing the findings of my study with your listeners and the rest of the world. As you have mentioned, if anyone wants to contact me, I have a LinkedIn link which you shall share, as you mentioned. My email account and telephone number are also provided on the article, which is available on Open Library Journal. Thank you once again, and I encourage you to keep working on promoting African languages.
And to you, my listeners, thank you also for always making time to join us on the show. It's been an interesting and insightful one, and I know you have grabbed a lot that you're going to use personally and also in your professional life. Till we come your way again next time, this is the Africa Language Service Providers Podcast, your go-to podcast for everything and anything African language. My name is Grace Hamwajuman. Till I see you again on the next episode, it is bye-bye from all of us here. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Africa's LSP Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. For feedback or enquiries, reach out to us at podcast@bolingoconsult.com. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite platforms. Until next time, stay curious and keep growing.